My name is Catherine DeWitt. For 52 years, I was known as the wife of Robert DeWitt, one of the most respected men in all of Charleston. My husband had only just been laid to rest, the scent of funeral lilies still hanging in the air, when my son, the very child I had poured my entire life into, looked an investor straight in the eye and smirked. I heard every single word, as clear as a bell, and as sharp as a piece of broken glass. When my father's $92 million estate is settled, I will be the one in charge. My mother? She'll be lucky to keep her gardening allowance. Come with me and discover the strength hidden behind a quiet facade. Witness how a woman reclaims not just her inheritance, but her very self. Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the channel to see exactly what I did to take back my honor and my legacy. The smell of lilies. That's the last thing of Robert's left in this house. Not the familiar scent of his pipe tobacco in the library or the smell of pine from his little workshop out behind the garden. Just lilies, mournfully sweet, clinging to every curtain, every piece of wood, like a guest who won't leave long after the host has passed on. It's been 2 days since the funeral. 2 days this old DeWitt house has been sunk in a phony silence, heavier than any scream. I'm sitting here in the library, what used to be Robert's sanctuary. My hand is tracing the spine of a book of Whitman's poetry he loved so much, but my eyes can't make out a single word. Grief isn't some storm that hits you and then it's over. It's more like a thick fog that seeps into your bones, making everything feel cold and lifeless. I've been Catherine DeWitt, wife of Robert DeWitt, for 52 years. Now, half of that identity is buried 6 feet under in that cold Charleston ground, and I haven't the faintest idea what the other half. The door creaks open, pulling me out of my thoughts. Amelia, my daughter-in-law, steps in. She always moves like she's gliding across a stage, efficient, not a wasted motion. She's wearing a cream-colored silk outfit, looking less like someone in mourning and more like a businesswoman heading to an important meeting. In her hand is one of those iPads, its artificial light looking so out of place among these warm mahogany bookshelves. She doesn't ask if I'm all right, doesn't even sit beside me for a minute. She just gets straight to the point, her voice as clear as a bell, but with no warmth to it. Catherine, she begins, and the way she says my name always makes me feel like an employee getting a report. Mark and I have discussed it. To make managing the estate easier moving forward, we think it's best if we move into the master bedroom. I look up, trying to digest her words. The master bedroom? My room and Robert's? The room where he took his last breath just a few days ago. Amelia carries on, not giving me a second to argue. Your room at the end of the hall, the guest room, will be much quieter. You won't be disturbed. It was an order, gift-wrapped in a thin layer of concern. A polite eviction. A lump forms in my throat. I want to scream that it's my room, that it holds the memories of my entire life. But the sorrow has just wrung all the strength out of me. All I can do is look at Amelia, into those cold blue eyes of hers, and give a mechanical nod. The occupation had begun, not with guns and bullets, but with sweet talk and an iPad. A few days later, that sorrowful silence was replaced by the sounds of life, but not the life I knew. The loud laughter of my 2 grandchildren, Landon and Claire, echoed down the halls, bouncing off walls that were used to Robert's whispers and the turning of pages. They'd come home from college for their grandfather's funeral, and now they were wandering through the house like young heirs surveying their new kingdom. That morning I was coming down the stairs, my hand on the familiar wooden banister. And then I just stopped, frozen. My 2 grandchildren, one 19 and the other 17, were holding rolls of neon-colored sticky notes, going through the living room and slapping them on things. The whole scene was so jarring and ridiculous, it felt like a dream. Claire, with her blonde hair twisted up in some stylish bun, stuck a hot pink note on the antique Steinway piano my mother gave me on my wedding day. "This will be perfect for my apartment in New York," she said to her brother, like she was picking out furniture in a high-end department store. Landon, tall and the spitting image of his father, slapped a painting of the salt marshes by a famous local artist, a painting Robert had waited in line all night to buy. "Dad said I can hang this in my law office someday," he said, sounding mighty pleased with himself. They talked so casually, without a bit of shame, as if I were a ghost, completely invisible in my own home. My heart just clenched. I walked over to the rosewood cabinet, the one that held the silver service my parents gave me, my most precious heirloom. Landon was about to stick a green note on it. "Wait, you two?" My voice trembled, weaker than I expected. "This cabinet." "Don't you worry, Mother." Amelia's voice came from right behind me, sweet but dripping with control. She put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look comforting, but was really meant to hold me in my place. "They're just helping us take inventory, to keep things clear." She glanced at the cabinet. "We'll put these older things in storage for you, where they'll be safe." That word, older, she said it like it was an insult. She wasn't just talking about the cabinet, she was talking about me, about everything I stood for. I just stood there, my breath shallow, watching those bright-colored notes spread like a rash, turning my home, my memories, into a checklist of assets to be divided up. The humiliation came on slowly, methodically, like a poison doled out in small drops each day. It all came to a head at dinner that evening. The crystal chandelier in the dining room was sparkling just like always, its light dancing on the fine silver and glasses. But the warm family dinner I used to love had turned into a courtroom where I was the one on trial. Mark, Amelia, and the two children were already at the table. I walked to my usual chair at the head of the table, the one opposite Robert's. But it was taken. Amelia was sitting there, as comfortable as you please, as if it had always been her spot. Mark, my son, the baby I'd stayed up all night with when he had a fever, didn't even bother to look up at me. He jutted his chin toward a small, lonely table that had been pulled out from the breakfast nook and placed near the kitchen door. "Mother," he said, his tone like he was giving an order to the hired help, "sit there for now. We need to discuss some important business matters." My whole world just stopped. I stared at that little table, a table for an outsider, for a child being punished. I was being pushed to the edge of my own dining room, treated like a stranger in my own family's life. I don't know how I made it to that table. Everything was a blur. I sat down, my back to them, facing the closed kitchen door. I could hear the clinking of their forks and knives against the plates, their cheerful chatter about future plans, about trips and investments. Every sound was like a little knife twisting in my heart. A moment later, our housekeeper, Martha, who's been with my family for nearly 40 years, brought me a plate. She couldn't look me in the eye, and her old eyes were red-rimmed. On the plate was a small piece of salmon and a few spears of asparagus, clearly what was left over after everyone else had served themselves. The food was stone cold. I picked up my fork, but my hand was shaking so much I couldn't bring it to my mouth. I sat there in that lonely, humiliating silence, and I realized they didn't just want my property. They wanted to erase me. They wanted me to disappear even while I was still breathing. And that's when, in the quiet of that cast-off table, a small, cold flame started to flicker in my chest. The flame of anger. A week after Robert's funeral, Mark and Amelia decided to throw a memorial party. A strange idea, really, since Robert hated loud parties. But I quickly understood this party wasn't for the man who was gone, but for the people left behind. It was a power play, a declaration that the dynasty had changed hands. That evening, the DeWitt house was all lit up again, but the light felt cold and foreign. Guests were streaming in. The whole of Charleston's high society was there. They came in their designer clothes and polite smiles, supposedly to pay their respects to Robert, but also to size up the new king of the castle. And Mark didn't disappoint them. My son moved through the crowd, champagne glass in hand, talking with a confidence that made him look just like a young king who'd just been crowned. I wore my simplest, most elegant black dress, trying my best to look like the calm lady of the house. But I felt more like a piece of old furniture pushed into a corner to make room for something new and shiny. Amelia circled me like a hawk. Every time I started a conversation with an old friend, she'd find a way to slide in. "Mrs. DeWitt has been a bit forgetful lately," she'd say with a fake, sympathetic smile. "An older person's memory, you know how it is." And then she'd answer for me, steering the conversation to Mark's future projects, making me out to be a child who needed a guardian. I could see the pity in my friends' eyes. They didn't know what to do, and their silence just made me feel more alone. The final insult came when Amelia led me to a solitary armchair, tucked away behind a large marble pillar near a side entrance. Her voice was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, a perfect performance of phony devotion. "Catherine, my dear, you look tired. Why don't you sit here and rest a moment, away from all the noise? At your age, your health comes first." The room seemed to go quiet for a heartbeat. Everyone understood the message. I was no longer Catherine DeWitt, mistress of this house. I was just an old woman who needed to be put in a corner out of the way. I sat down, my cheeks burning. I could hear the whispers, see the sideways glances. I'd become a piece of gossip in my own home. From my corner, I could see my son clearly. He was standing by the fireplace, talking excitedly with a big-shot investor from New York, a man with silver hair and an expensive suit. The investor glanced over at me, a curious look in his eye. I faintly heard him ask, "And your mother, she must be so pleased to see you taking over." Mark let out a little laugh, a laugh I'd never heard from him before. It was cold and calculating. He lowered his voice, but in a sudden hush in the room, his words carried over to me, as sharp as a shard of broken glass. "My mother belongs to another world, a world of tea parties and rose gardens. She'll be well taken care of." He took a sip of champagne, then added, his voice full of condescension, "But let's be realistic. Once my father's $92 million estate is settled, I'll be the one calling the shots. She'll be lucky to keep her gardening allowance." A roaring started in my ears. The music, the chatter, it all seemed to fade away, leaving only my son's cruel words echoing in the silence. Her gardening allowance. He had put a price on my entire life of sacrifice, on my love, and it was a pittance you tossed to the hired help. That was the last straw. The grief of losing my husband, the loneliness, the shame of being treated like a leftover, it all boiled up and exploded into a single, pure, powerful feeling: rage. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. That's what weak people do. I just slowly, deliberately stood up straight. My back wasn't bent with grief anymore. My chin was high. There was a subtle shift in the way I held myself, a change that maybe only people who truly knew me would see. The soft, grieving widow had vanished. In her place stood the cold, regal bearing of a long-forgotten queen. I looked across the crowd, past the strange faces and fake smiles. My eyes landed on the card table where my dearest friends were sitting. Eleanor Pinckney, the sharp-witted wife of the bank president, the woman who'd stood with me through Hurricane Hugo all those years ago, looked up. Our eyes met. She saw it. She saw the change in me. I gave her a tiny nod, almost invisible, but it was a declaration of war. Eleanor nodded back, a determined glint in her eyes. I turned and walked calmly toward the grand staircase. Every eye was on me. A hush fell over the room. They probably thought I was running away in shame, but they were wrong. I wasn't running. I was heading to my armory. I was going to the room that held the memories, the secrets, and the power that I had willingly locked away for 35 years. The battle may not have started yet, but tonight I had chosen my battlefield, and it wasn't going to be a rose garden. I walked up those marble stairs, each step firm and deliberate. Behind me, the music and the chatter seemed to fade into the distance. I didn't look back. That shallow, cruel world down there wasn't mine anymore. Tonight, I needed a different kind of sanctuary, a place that belonged only to me. My destination was the small attic room at the end of the West Hall. It used to be my study when I was a girl, before I became Mrs. DeWitt. Now it was covered in a fine layer of dust and neglect. I switched on the old desk lamp, and its warm yellow light fell across stacks of books, yellowed papers, and old maps of Charleston. The air smelled of old paper and sealed-up memories. I went to the dark oak cabinet, a solid heirloom piece. My hand trembled just a little as I fit the small brass key into the lock. A soft click broke the silence. Inside, there was no jewelry or money, but something far more precious. My past. I carefully lifted out a large photo album, its leather cover worn and faded with time. I sat down in the old armchair, the album in my lap. My hand skimmed across the rough cover. Every scratch on it told a story. I took a deep breath, like I was about to dive into deep water, and opened it. Yellowed newspaper clippings, black and white photographs. My own face from 35 years ago looked back at me, young, full of fire, my eyes shining with a light I thought had gone out long ago. And then the memories came flooding back, not like a gentle stream, but like a hurricane. Charleston, September 1989. My city was dying in the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo. I remember that night like it was yesterday, finding Robert in the library. He was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, running his hands through his graying hair. In front of him were documents from that big corporation in Atlanta. "It's over, Catherine," he said, his voice full of a despair I rarely heard from my strong husband. "They're too powerful. Their lawyers, their money. We're going to lose the soul of this city." I was sitting at a smaller desk in the corner, my own workspace. I was surrounded by law books, zoning maps, and a list of all the old, important families in town. I wasn't panicking. The storm outside could tear down houses, but it couldn't touch the will I had inside me. "It's not over, my love," I said, my voice soft but with a steel edge that cut through his panic. That night, and for many nights after, the library became our secret war room. I was the strategist, and Robert was my general. I never appeared in public. The world back then wasn't ready to listen to a woman, but they would listen to Robert DeWitt. I sat by the fireplace, scribbling down sharp arguments, picking apart every weakness in their contracts. The next morning, Robert would deliver those exact words in a passionate speech at City Hall, and the whole room would erupt in applause. I'd watch it on the television in our living room, my heart swelling with pride. I called my friends from the Bridge Club, Eleanor Pinckney, Margaret Mutledge, Elizabeth Vanderhorst. These next moves were critical, and they were the ones who could help us. I asked Eleanor, whose husband was a bigwig at the city bank, to dig into the corporation's finances. Margaret, a retired judge, would comb through every preservation law on the books. Elizabeth, with her brother on the planning commission, would delay every permit they filed. I stayed up all night, handwriting a heartfelt letter, stirring up Charleston's pride and history. The next morning, Robert gave that letter to an influential journalist who then wrote an editorial that moved the entire city. No one ever knew who the real author was. The night before the city council's final vote, Robert was nearly crumbling under the pressure. I took his hand right here at this desk. "You can do this, Robert. You are Robert DeWitt. You were born to lead. Just say what I wrote for you. Say it from your heart. Be the hero they need." And with the information we gathered, my husband had a fiery, televised debate with their CEO, leaving the man speechless with his sharp arguments. Finally, at the 11th hour, when it looked like the corporation might just win, I made a bold move. I laid out the plan for Robert. We would use our own family trust, convince Eleanor's family and the others to do the same, and make a counteroffer to buy one of the city's most iconic buildings, completely derailing their plans. That move changed everything. Attacked from all sides and realizing they had underestimated the will of the people of Charleston, the corporation backed down. We had won. The whole city celebrated Robert DeWitt. The papers called him the Lion of Charleston, the man who saved the city's soul. His name was etched into history. That night, after the victory party, when it was just the two of us in our bedroom, he held me close. There was no ego in his embrace, just endless gratitude and a little bit of guilt. "Catherine," he whispered, "this was your victory. Every idea, every strategy, it was all you. I was just the mouthpiece. This glory should have been yours." I smiled, a little sadly. "No, Robert, Charleston needed a hero, and a hero needs a face. I don't need that. I just need you and Mark and this home." I looked him deep in the eyes. "Let everyone think it was you. It's better for all of us that way. For the DeWitt family name. This will be our secret." It was a promise, a conscious sacrifice. A few days later, I met privately with my friends from the Bridge Club. "Thank you all for your help," I said. Eleanor took my hand, her sharp eyes seeing right through me. "We didn't help Robert. We helped you, Catherine, and we will never forget who really steered this ship through the storm." That oath of loyalty was sealed, buried for 35 years, waiting for the day it would be awakened. I stood up and wiped my tears. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. I walked over to the old telephone on the desk. My finger traced the rotary dial, a familiar motion from the past. I didn't need a phone book. This number was carved into my memory. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Eleanor?" I said, my voice no longer trembling. It was calm, steady, and held a weight that even I had forgotten. "It's Catherine. It's been too long since we've had tea. Tomorrow at the usual place. There are some old matters we need to revisit." Our meeting took place the next day, not in a public cafe, but in the private tea room of Eleanor Pinckney's historic home, a place where the walls knew how to keep secrets. The Bridge Club was all there, every single member. Margaret Rutledge, her silver hair in a neat bun, and Elizabeth Vanderhorst, as elegant as ever. No cards were dealt, just porcelain teacups and a waiting silence. I didn't complain about my pain. I didn't cry about how Mark and Amelia had treated me. These women didn't need the details. They'd seen the shameful display at the party. I just looked them straight in the eye, my old friends, my allies, and said one simple sentence. "Mark has forgotten who he is and where he comes from," I said, my voice even. "I think it's time to remind him." Not a request, not a plea for help. I didn't have to. There was an understanding between us deeper than words. Eleanor gave a slight nod, Margaret took a sip of her tea, and Elizabeth just smiled, a smile full of meaning. The storm had been unleashed, not with thunder and lightning, but with the quiet clink of porcelain teacups. Mark had no idea. My son, so confident in his money and his new connections, was still busy with his plans. He figured my displeasure was just an old woman's tantrum that would soon pass. He didn't know that the first dominoes were already beginning to fall. The first one fell gently, disguised as bureaucracy. The permit application for Mark's hotel project, the one he was so sure would sail through, was suddenly sent back by the Urban Planning Commission. The reason? A supplemental report on the cultural and historical impact to adjacent properties is required. I knew that adjacent property was the DeWitt house. Elizabeth Vanderhorst's brother had done his job well. That process could take years. Mark was furious. I heard him yelling on the phone with his lawyer. He blamed the slow-moving government, the old fossils standing in the way of progress. He still hadn't realized this wasn't just a coincidence. The second domino fell harder. The largest bank in Charleston, where the Pinckneys were major shareholders, suddenly sent a notice temporarily freezing Mark's massive business loan. The reason given was a re-evaluation of risk based on uncertainties in the historic real estate market. Mark started to panic. His cash flow, the lifeblood of all his projects, had been cut off. He called the bank president, Eleanor's husband, but the man just politely replied that everything was being done according to standard procedure. The final and cruelest domino fell in the social arena. The St. Cecilia Society, the most exclusive private club that every man in Charleston dreamed of joining, sent a letter to Mark. The letter, handwritten on fine stationery, informed him that his invitation to their annual ball, an honor his father had spent years earning, had been withdrawn due to an unfortunate administrative error. It was a slap in the face, a social death sentence. It meant that Mark DeWitt was out of the game. His wife, Amelia, who had spent her whole life climbing the social ladder, was in tears, blaming him for everything. The little empire they had built on sand was starting to crumble. After days of frantically searching for answers, Mark finally went to see Judge Hemphill, a very dear old friend of Robert's, an honorable man he thought would be immune to rumors. They met at the private club, a place of oak paneling and leather chairs. The old judge, his eyes tired but sharp, didn't beat around the bush. He just placed a glass of bourbon in front of Mark. "You think you're in the real estate business, don't you, Mark?" he began. "You're wrong. In Charleston, you're in the reputation business, and you've just declared bankruptcy." Mark was stunned. "Don't you get it?" the judge continued, his voice low. "Do you know why that riverfront promenade is still there? Why your house is still standing?" "It was my father," Mark answered immediately. "The city history books all say so." The old judge looked Mark straight in the eye. "You think your father was a great hero, don't you, Mark?" he said after hearing Mark's reply. "And you're right. He was a hero. But did you ever wonder who wrote his speeches for him? Who told him where to strike?" And then he gave him the answer he never expected. "It was your mother. She was the one who really planned it all. And all of us who were involved back then are eternally grateful to her. Because of her, this city is what it is today." In that moment, I can just imagine the look on my son's face. The arrogance draining away, replaced by shock, then horror. Vague childhood memories of his mother being so busy, of powerful women always visiting the house, suddenly came into sharp focus. He realized the force he was up against wasn't a frail old mother, but a living legend. Mark raced home like a man possessed. He found me, not in the living room or the library, but in the garden. I was calmly pruning my roses, the very roses he had wanted to tear out. The gentle afternoon sun shone on my silver hair. My peacefulness, I know, must have looked terrifying to him. He stood there, stammering, his usual confidence gone, leaving only a panicked man. "Mother, I didn't know. I'll cancel the project. I'm so sorry." I put down my pruning shears and took off my gardening gloves. I turned to face him. "You didn't know, or you didn't care to know?" My voice wasn't angry, just filled with a bottomless weariness and disappointment. You've lived in this house, enjoyed the fruits of this family's reputation, without once asking where it came from. You only saw the numbers in your father's bank account, not the invisible bricks that I laid. The reading of the will took place the next day. The air in the lawyer's office was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mark and Amelia sat there, silent and pale. The lawyer read Robert's will, clear and final. Just as I knew, the DeWitt house in full control of the Heritage Trust Fund, the largest and most powerful part of the estate, were left to me. Mark received only a portion of stocks and investments, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to chase his extravagant dreams. After the lawyer finished, I looked at my son, who now seemed so small and pitiful. He looked at me with pleading eyes. "I chose silence for your father's sake and for yours," I said, my voice flat, without a trace of emotion. "I gave you a peaceful life, one where you wouldn't be overshadowed by your mother, but you mistook my silence for weakness. Now you know." I stood up, adjusting my jacket. A legacy isn't something you're given, it's something you have to be worthy of. From here on out, you walk your own path. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving my son to sit there with the wreckage of his career and his pride. I didn't feel victorious or even satisfied. I just felt a deep sadness. I had to summon the hurricane inside me to save my garden, but in the process, I knew that some of the most beautiful roses had been damaged forever. I thought that was the end of it, but a few weeks later, Mark came back, alone. He looked thin and tired. He didn't ask for money. He just sat down in the chair across from me in the library. "I've been reading the old articles," he said, his voice hoarse, about Dad. I'm starting to see your fingerprints everywhere, in every word, in every decision." He looked up at me, his eyes red. Why did you do it?" For the first time in years, I truly talked with my son. I told him about my promise to his father, about the choice I made. "It wasn't your father's fault," I finished. "It was the fault of an entire era. And maybe it was my fault too, for not believing you were strong enough to accept a mother who did more than just grow roses." A silence settled between us. Not a heavy silence, but a silence of understanding. Mark and his family weren't kicked out, but things had changed. They sold their expensive downtown apartment and moved into a smaller house. Amelia, no longer a society queen, had to get a real job. Landon and Claire, my grandchildren, had to get part-time jobs to help with their tuition. The neon sticky notes were gone, replaced by an understanding of the value of $1 and a hard day's work. Mark didn't leave Charleston. He started over, with a small construction company that specialized in restoring old homes. He was no longer a prince, but a craftsman, learning to respect every brick, every piece of wood. Sometimes he still stops by, not to ask for anything, but to get my opinion on a design, or just to share a cup of tea with me in silence. Our relationship will never be what it once was. The crack is still there, a permanent reminder of foolishness and pain. But it's being mended, slowly, with a new mortar made of respect and truth. I still live in the DeWitt house, among my roses. I am no longer an anonymous legend, nor do I need to be a guardian angel. I am just Catherine, whole, complete, and free. And sometimes, in the quiet of my garden, I think that is the most precious legacy of all.